Here is an example of a real MCAT CARS passage, the main points of the paragraphs and the central thesis of the passage.
We must first make a distinction between literature and literary study. The two are distinct activities. One is creative and art. The other, if not precisely a science, is a species of knowledge or of learning. There have been attempts, of course, to obliterate this distinction. For instance, it has been argued that one cannot understand literature unless one writes it, that one cannot and should not study Pope without trying one's own hand at heroic couplets, or an Elizabethan drama without writing a drama in blank verse.
Right. So what do you think is the main point of this paragraph here?
That there's a difference between literature and literary study.
That's the main thing. And what is the specific difference?
Like writing literature is more of like artistic versus literary studies more like analysis.
Yes, that's that's not the language they use, but it is right. But the language they use here is it's a species of knowledge, it's a way of knowing, and one is a form of art, which is a way of expressing. Right. Exactly. Okay, excellent. All right, so yet useful as the experience of literary creation is, the task of the student is completely different. The student must translate the experience of literature into intellectual terms, assimilate it into a coherent scheme, which must be rational if it is to be knowledge. It may be true that the subject matter is irrational, or at least contains strongly irrational elements, but the student of literature will not be therefore in any other position than the historian of painting or the musicologist, for that matter. Or the musicologist, or for that matter, the sociologist or the anatomist. Okay, so how would you summarize this one?
This one is going more into the part about literary study and what the student has to do. And like it's like a little confusing trying to explain this part. I get it, but I don't know how to word it. Like even if the literature itself is not rational, the student has to understand it or explain it in a way that is rational.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. And you can think about you can watch a really weird movie or read a really weird book it's really emotional. It's not very logical, but then you can reflect on it and reason about it. Right. And so that's the idea. Okay, great.
The problem is one of how intellectually to deal with art and with literary art specifically. Can it be done and how can it be done? One answer has been it can be done with the methods developed by the natural sciences, which need only be transferred to the study of literature. Several kinds of such transfer can be distinguished. One is the attempt to emulate the general scientific ideals of objectivity, impersonality, and certainty, an attempt which on the whole supports the collecting of neutral facts. Another is the effort to imitate the methods of natural science through the study of causal antecedents and origins. Scientific causality is used to explain literary phenomena by the assignment of determining causes to economic, social, and political conditions. Again, there is the introduction of the quantitative methods appropriately used in some scientists, i.e. statistics, charts, and graphs. And finally, there is the attempt to use biological concepts in the tracing of the evolution of literature.
Great. So here, what's the author trying to say?
It's breaking down the more scientific ways of dealing with literature or literary study, I guess, about how one of them was trying to be objective and finding the neutral facts. The other was cause and effect, and then contributing the causes to more outside sources in ways like economy. And then finally trying to track down the evolution of the literature.
Yes, right. Exactly, right. And the question it opens with, just to point out, is how do we approach the study of literature? Mm-hmm. One way is this. And then the next paragraph, today there would be almost general recognition that this transfer has not fulfilled the expectations with which it was made originally. There is, no doubt, a large field in which the methodologies of science and literary study contact or even overlap. Such fundamental methods as induction and deduction, analysis, synthesis, and comparison are common to all types of systematic knowledge. but patently the other solution commends itself. Literary scholarship has its own valid methods, which are not always those of the natural sciences, but are nevertheless intellectual methods.
So this one is saying how, although like all these strategies in the last paragraph, like they work, but they don't work as well as they're supposed to. You have to kind of treat literature as its own thing because it has its own methods, which are different from science analysis kind of thing.
Right. And the important part is that they're both ways of knowing. Another
Only a very narrow conception of truth can exclude the achievements of the humanities from the realm of knowledge. Long before modern scientific development, philosophy, history, jurisprudence, theology, and even philology had worked out valid methods of knowing. Their achievements may have become obscured by the theoretical and practical triumphs of the modern physical sciences, but they are nevertheless real and permanent and can sometimes, with some modifications, easily be resuscitated or renovated. It should be simply recognized that there is this difference between the methods and aims of the natural sciences and the humanities.
excellent. So here, what would you say?
So this one is kind of almost reinforcing the last paragraph by just giving other examples that like preceded scientific knowledge, philosophy and such, that were also considered like ways of knowing things or learning things that like are now overshadowed, but these were like originally there even before.
That's right. And not only is it that they're originally there, but what else is it saying about their methods? So there's the historical dimension, correct? That these existed, but is it saying something about, are these good, bad, reliable, not reliable, valid?
They are valid.
That's right. And that's important here, right? So the idea that there are other ways of knowing the world. That's why we haven't closed all history departments, philosophy departments, and other humanities departments, right? There are valid ways of knowing things there. Yeah. So now, what do you think the main point of the author is?
Talking about like literary study as a whole, how it's can be explained by some scientific analysis, but it is different and like distinct from it, and to not undermine that kind of way of knowledge.
Excellent. That's right. Exactly, right? That there's, there may be some overlap, but it's its own thing and we shouldn't undermine it. And I think that way of phrasing it was very good. Great job.
Thank you.
Understanding the central thesis of an MCAT CARS passage is essential for your success in the CARS section. Use these tips to score in the 90th percentile or higher. Stick around for the questions that go with this passage.